The parking lot outside the hospital shimmered in the desert night like a mirage, and I moved through it as if I were underwater, the ache of an 18-hour shift settling behind my eyes and into my ribs. I had pronounced 3 people gone, coaxed breath back into 2, and cracked a rib while driving compressions into the chest of a teenager whose parents were still praying in the waiting room. I wore drying blood on my sleeve, and the antiseptic sting of the ICU clung to my skin. All I wanted was a shower, a quiet meal, and 4 hours of dreamless sleep before dawn pushed me back into the fluorescent hum. I pulled into the driveway of the house I had called home since childhood, slid my key into the lock, and found only resistance. It didn't turn. I jiggled, frowned, felt the fog lift from my brain in a hard, bright line of disbelief. The door opened, and there was Lisa Yoga Pants' wine-stained tank top phone balanced in her palm like a scepter. Behind her, Kayla sprawled on the couch in my hoodie scrolling. Her boyfriend crunched chips I'd paid for. "We changed the locks," Lisa said almost cheerfully. "Rent's gone up. $36,000 in back pay plus utilities. Your sister needs a vacation. You're a doctor. You can afford it." The word doctor landed like a blade she meant to twist. I stood on the welcome mat with my duffel biting into my shoulder and looked past her at the living room that still held my textbooks in a neat stack, my name printed on envelopes atop the side table. "Did Dad approve this?" I asked. She smiled the kind of smile you give to a child who doesn't understand adult rules. "Your father's overseas. This is my house when he's gone." I thought of the cinnamon candles my mother used to light in October, the throw blankets she left in every chair, the photo of us laughing that used to hang in the hallway before it vanished overnight. I was 12 when a car accident took her. I was 15 when Dad remarried, promising Lisa would hold down the fort while he deployed with a military medical program. What she held down was me. The blankets disappeared. Lavender plugins took their place. Kayla moved in all volume and rolling eyes, calling adults by their first names and breaking rules that didn't seem to apply to her. The framed photo of my mother went missing. "Don't you think it's time we moved on?" Lisa asked when I searched for it, and by we she meant me alone. I learned to stay small. I took extra shifts. I paid more than my share without being asked. I replaced the downstairs faucet when it broke and covered groceries when the card acted up. When Kayla's older, tattooed, unemployed boyfriend drifted into our orbit, Lisa called him family. I was never called that in the same tone. In mid-school and residency, I kept my head down because peace felt cheaper than conflict, and I was saving what little energy I had for the work that mattered. Later, after my first real paycheck conversation at the dinner table turned into a running commentary about money, Lisa's complaints about how expensive it was to raise girls weren't subtle. Neither were the hints that I had lived there for free for too long. I kept paying, hoping maturity might outlast entitlement. I kept paying right up until the night the locks were changed. Standing on the mat with a key that no longer fit, I felt the last thin thread of concession snap. "Understood," I said. I turned, walked to my car, and drove back to the hospital. I slept in the call room under a scratchy blanket with the monitor beeping in the hall, and somewhere else in the city, they congratulated themselves for setting a price on my dignity. At sunrise, my exhaustion burned down to something clean and cool. I drove back, knocked once, and laid an envelope on the center of the doormat. I parked down the street and waited because Lisa was a creature of habit who checked the step at 9:02 a.m. She appeared in fuzzy slippers with a mug that read, "Number 1 Mom," in peeling glitter. She bent, slit the envelope, and the sound she made split the quiet. Lights flipped on across the street. A dog started up. Curtains quivered. Kayla stumbled out, grabbed the papers, and started yelling. I watched from the car with my hands steady on the wheel. The letter didn't shout. It didn't plead. It was business clean, final, undeniable. Type, continue to receive the next part. They didn't expect a consequence shaped like a signature. They expected me to cry to negotiate to hand over another month of peace for the price of silence. Instead, the envelope on the mat held a formal notice to vacate stapled to a copy of the deed with my name printed clearly where theirs had never been. What they had never bothered to ask about, and what I had never bragged about, was that my father bought the house before he married Lisa, and when I turned 21, he placed it in a trust with me as beneficiary. Just in case he'd said with the practical tenderness of a man who knows how quickly life takes sharp turns. I kept that safety net folded and hidden because I wanted kindness to be chosen, not compelled. But they had run out of the kind of chances people mistake for weakness. The day the letter landed, my phone filled with voicemails that careened from fury to mockery to a polished grief made for public display. Lisa's voice hissed through the speaker forged illegal pathetic. Kayla's message sounded like a siren betrayal eviction homelessness. I hit save on each one and forwarded them to my lawyer, along with the trust documents and the recorded delivery receipt for the notice. Then I opened a folder on my laptop and named it Proof. I knew how this would go. When people build their power by leaning on the quiet, one truth looks like treason. Within hours, Lisa posted a status that weaponized vagueness. It's a sad day when someone you raised forgets who fed them. The comment section bloomed with prayer hands and pity. Kayla filmed herself crying under trendy audio captioned with the kind of half-truth that spreads faster than facts. POV, your sister kicks you out for asking her to pay rent for once. A relative I hadn't heard from in years texted to ask why I was attacking family. A neighbor wrote to say she hoped we could reconcile and think of the memories. I didn't answer. The internet is an echo chamber too wide to carry nuance, and I wasn't auditioning for sympathy. I was taking back my house. When outrage didn't move me, they tried menace. After a midnight shift, I found a note taped to my windshield. If you do this, we'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. Don't test us. No signature. I photographed it, sent it to my lawyer, and added it to Proof. The next day, a distant cousin messaged me a screenshot of a group chat where Lisa called me vindictive and ungrateful and hinted that Dad's marriage entitled her to half of everything he ever touched. My lawyer printed that too and attached a cover sheet that began with separate property and ended with the phrases clean chain of title and no marital interest. Somewhere between the TikTok tears and the legal terms, a clarity settled over me that I recognized from the ICU. When a heart is failing, it thrashes before it stills. Their noise was a kind of thrashing. Mine was the stillness of a plan already set. I turned my focus to what mattered: patience, whose alarms were not theatrics, and I let rhetoric spend itself into exhaustion. At night, I drove past the house and watched the porch light burn too bright the way it always did when Lisa wanted the street to see her. I didn't stop. I didn't knock. She was waiting for a fight she could televise. I was preparing for an outcome she couldn't. I slept in a friend's spare room where no one asked me for proof of my worth, and on my day off, I labeled boxes for the storage unit I'd rent while repairs happened. In the quiet between charts and shift swaps, I copied every relevant text and kept every receipt. The deadline circled closer on the calendar like a red moon, and even as the comments piled up online like a snowdrift of invented injuries, I felt less and less of their weight. My energy had somewhere better to live. Type, continue to receive the next part. 4 days before the deadline, Lisa changed tactics. She called and skipped hello. You can't do this. I'm his wife. The house is half mine. I spoke to her the way I speak to a panicking family member, in a code blue calm, precise, unyielding. The house was purchased before your marriage. It was transferred into a trust with me as beneficiary. You have received legal notice. Please refer future communications to counsel. She swore at me and hung up. 10 minutes later, she posted another status that blurred the truth until she could wear it like a cloak. Some people weaponize paperwork when gratitude would have saved everything. Gratitude. As if the years of bills I'd paid were a rumor. As if erasing my mother's picture was kindness. I printed the post and set it atop the pile with the rest. That evening, my phone lit with a number I knew by heart, even after months of distance. My father's voice carried the sound of travel and fatigue, but also a steadiness I hadn't heard since he sat beside me at the kitchen table with a medical journal open to a study on ventilator settings. "I figured it would come to this," he said. "I didn't know about the locks, but I've been hearing things. Send me the documents." I did everything, including screenshots of Lisa's campaign for sympathy and the typed threat on my windshield. He read in silence. "I'm sorry," he said, finally. "I should have come home sooner. I'm handling it now." The second certified letter went out the next morning, written in the kind of language that doesn't bend to emotion. Separate property, grantor's intent trust, distribution, lack of spousal interest notice to quit. It arrived just as Kayla uploaded a new clip eyes red, claiming I'd tossed her onto the street because I was jealous of her happiness. The comments fed on themselves. I let them. The neighbor across the street called to say people were whispering that I'd forged the deed. "I know the truth," she added, voice soft. "Your mother taught you to bake cookies on that porch." I remember. Memories have witnesses. That helped more than I expected. The night before the deadline, I laid out my clothes. Not scrubs, not armor. Just a clean shirt that said I was awake and done apologizing. I placed the deed, the trust summary, the stamped notices, and my lawyer's card in a folder I had handled so often, the edges were starting to soften. I slept lightly and woke before the sun, feeling the rare kind of readiness that settles when all the choices have already been made. At 9:59, I parked at the curb. At 10, I walked up the path and knocked. Lisa opened the door with her arms folded tight, as if her body could barricade what the law had already opened. "We're not leaving," she said. "You can't make us." "I already did," I answered. "You have 30 minutes. She laughed brittle and loud, hoping the neighbors heard. Kayla appeared, voice pitched to the edge of breaking. "You're throwing us out like trash." "No," I said. "I gave you time and choices. You made yours." The sound of a car pulling up cut through the air. My father stepped out, tan cardigan on his shoulders, a steadiness in the way he closed the door that reminded me of the man who used to sit awake until I got home after study group. He walked past Lisa's outstretched hand and met my eyes. "Do you have a minute?" We stepped aside. He handed me an envelope. Inside were notarized divorce papers, the ink still fresh enough to shine. "I filed overseas," he said. "I should have listened sooner. She didn't want a family. She wanted control." "I'm done." He added almost shyly that he'd met someone kind who cooked him simple meals and made him feel like himself again. "I'm not replacing your mother," he said, "but I think I've been lonely for a long time." "You deserve happiness," I said, and found that I meant it without effort. We turned back to the doorway. I know everything he told Lisa, her posts, her threats, the calculated way she'd measured me like an ATM with a heartbeat. This isn't your house. It never was. Kayla tried to argue, and he stopped her with a look I had only ever seen when a line in the OR had to be drawn with absolute finality. Pack. Type. Continue to receive the next part. By sunset, the house sounded like a stage after a failed performance. Cabinet doors, banging closet hangers, scraping drawers, yanked and slammed in frantic rhythm. Kayla cried into her phone until her voice went hoarse, and then cried some more. The boyfriend vanished halfway through, limping the loyalty he'd always claimed. Lisa stuffed clothes into black trash bags as if speed could humiliate me into retreat. She muttered about judges and revenge, about the cruelty of daughters, and about all the ways the world had wronged her. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't subtract from the math already done. At midnight, silence finally unfolded through the rooms in a clean sheet. I walked barefoot through the brightness I had switched on in every lamp, not because I needed the light, but because I could. In the kitchen, I brewed coffee at 2 a.m, and no one tutted about the noise. On the porch, a blanket around my shoulders, I looked down the street. Lisa once tried to reign over by force of volume, and found it smaller than I remembered, almost tender in its ordinariness. The next days were devoted to repairs, patching the marks left by furniture dragged out in anger, repainting the wall, where my mother's photo would hang again, changing the locks back, and setting them to a code I chose. In the quiet, my body remained tired in the honest way work makes you, but the bone-deep exhaustion that once came from living on someone else's terms began to lift like a fever breaking. Lisa tried to sue. The case wobbled and fell. The trust was clean. The deed was clean. The timeline was clean. My lawyer handed me the stamped dismissal, and I felt something unclench in my chest that had been tight since the first lavender plug-in replaced cinnamon. Kayla and her boyfriend moved in with his parents for a while. That ended when unpaid bills and headset shouting wore down whatever patience lived in that house. Word of their departures reached me like radio static from a station I no longer tuned to. My father called from overseas and sounded lighter each time, telling me about the sea near his apartment and the way morning smelled there. He apologized again, less because I needed it than because he needed to say it, and we let Grace do what paperwork couldn't. I began to trust the quiet. Still, the habit of bracing took longer to leave. I would come home after a double key steady in the lock and pause out of old reflex, waiting for the next demand to drop from the ceiling with a note attached that read, "Family." It didn't come. The proof folder on my laptop grew dusty, a museum of ghosts. On a Sunday, I took it off my desktop and moved it to the archive. On a Monday, I printed a photo of my mother and me, her arm looped around my neck, both of us laughing at something out of frame. I hung it in the hallway where I used to stop as a kid just to straighten it before school. The house felt like itself again. People who had believed the online performance sent careful messages, halfway apologies, shaped like questions. I answered a few and let the rest dissolve. You can forgive without stepping back into a room built to diminish you. In the ICU, we measure progress in small numbers that mean everything. Oxygenation, creeping up, pressure, easing down. Healing at home used the same math. Sleep returned first, deeper, and without the old vigilance. Then, appetite. Then music in the kitchen while I chopped onions, a song my mother used to hum when she burned the toast. Grief and relief can live in the same chest for a while, and I let them, knowing one would tuck the other in eventually. A week later, a neighbor waved from across the street and told me she was glad to see the porch light soft again. It was the smallest sentence and felt like a benediction. Type, continue to receive the next part. 6 months after the envelope on the doormat, the last of the noise had drained away, leaving something simple and good. The house held only what belonged, the cinnamon candles I bought because memory has a scent worth keeping, the blanket on the chair that I pull over my knees after night shifts, the framed photo catching morning light the way it used to. My father sent pictures of the coast and sounded like a man who had found a door out of a smoke-filled room. He had learned at last that loyalty is not the same as surrender. I had learned that silence can be a scalpel when you use it to cut away what doesn't belong. Sometimes, after a brutal shift, I still stand in the entryway and listen as if the house itself might speak. It does in the way houses do, with settled wood and water humming through pipes and the soft drone of an old refrigerator making good on its promise to keep what it holds. I think of the girl I was at 12, and then 15, and then 21, and I wish I could put this key in her palm and tell her that the version of family who cannot bear your boundaries was never home. Home is the place where your presence is not an inconvenience to be taxed. Home is the quiet that doesn't make you flinch. When people ask whether I went too far, I think about every bill I paid in hope that kindness would be returned every late-night shift I stumbled home from, only to have my exhaustion leveraged into obligation every time my mother's name was treated like clutter. I think about the locks that turned me into a trespasser in my own history. Then I think about the law that exists for a reason, and the father who found his way back to himself, and the way the porch looks at sunrise now unadorned, unperformed, honest. No, I didn't go too far. I finally went far enough. If you've been listening and you recognize the shape of your own story and mine, I hope you hear this clearly. You are allowed to leave rooms that treat your generosity as a currency to be mined. You are allowed to reclaim what is yours without asking the people who took it for permission. You are allowed to build a life where your peace is not a loan someone else can call due. There is work in the world that will always be hard and holy, the kind that asks for your hands and gives you purpose in return. Spend yourself there. Come home to a door that opens. Breathe. If this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe to support more true stories like this, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what boundary you finally decided to hold. Your voice might be the reminder someone else needs today.